I never believed in ghosts. I always thought that people who had watched too many scary movies made up all these scary stories. But when I went to university, everything changed. What happened to me was something I will never forget. It was 2003. I had gone to university in England and had taken a small but cozy room in one of the old university halls of residence. My roommate, James, was a quiet and lovely boy who, like me, had just arrived at university. The building was old. Its high stone walls had an eerie feeling like they had kept many secrets inside for years. But I didn't pay any attention to these things, at least not until the nightmares started. The first night I slept in the hostel, I felt someone standing next to my bed. My eyelids were heavy and I couldn't move. Something was standing in the darkness. A black shadow that had the shape of a man. My heart was pounding. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my throat. I waved my hand with all my might, and suddenly the shadow disappeared. I woke up gasping for breath. The room was dark, with only the faint moonlight shining through the window. James was asleep and everything seemed normal. I told myself it was a nightmare, just a simple nightmare. But that was only the beginning. A few nights later, I experienced the same terrifying feeling again. This time, as I lay in the dark, I heard soft whispers, inaudible voices, as if someone was speaking in my ear, but the words were inaudible. I didn't dare open my eyes. I held my breath and just listened. Suddenly I heard James's voice. "Did you hear it too?" I jumped. James was looking at me in horror. "What did you hear?" I asked in a trembling voice. A whisper, as if someone was saying something. I nodded my head in agreement. I didn't dare say anything because if I did, I would have to admit that it was real. We didn't sleep well at night. Sometimes there were footsteps in the hallway when no one was around. Sometimes in the middle of the night, our door would open on its own. But the worst thing happened on the fifth night. That night, I heard a moaning sound in my ears. I was frozen with fear. I slowly opened my eyes and saw it. A shadow was standing next to my bed. But this time it was clearer. The ghost of a woman with long hair covering her face. My body was paralyzed. I couldn't move. She leaned over and whispered something in my ear. Her breath was cold, so cold it felt like I was in a refrigerator. All I heard was one sentence. "He didn't kill me. I did it myself." I woke up screaming. James was also awake and looking at me in horror. I told him we had to get out of this dorm right now. It was midnight, but I couldn't stay in that room anymore. The next day we researched the history of the dormitory. What we found was even scarier than our nightmares. A few years ago, a girl named Emily had committed suicide in that same room. It was reported that she had been depressed for a while, but everyone believed that she had not been murdered, but had thrown herself out of the window. The same window through which moonlight streamed into our room every night. Now I understood why her ghost had whispered in my ear. She didn't kill me. I did it myself. That day we packed up and left the room forever. But still, at night, in the silence of the house, I sometimes feel someone standing by my bed. Maybe Emily's ghost is still with me. Have you ever been somewhere where you feel like you are not alone? Be careful of dark shadows. Some of them are not just shadows. I always believed that home was a place where you felt safe. But after my experience, I realized that sometimes home can be the scariest place in the world. What happened to me was something I will never forget. It was 2010. I had just graduated from college and was living alone for the first time in a small, old apartment in a quiet neighborhood. The house I rented was an old building with thick walls and high ceilings. It looked beautiful and classic, but there was always a strange feeling in the air. Something I couldn't explain, but I could feel it. The neighbor next door was a lonely old man who rarely left his house. The rest of the neighbors seemed normal. Everything seemed normal until the strange and terrifying nights began. The first night I slept in that house, I was awakened by a sound in the middle of the night. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But when I listened more closely, I realized it was the sound of something scratching on the wall. The sound of nails scratching the wall. It was coming from the wall of the next unit. I thought maybe the old man next door was moving something. But why in the middle of the night? I listened for a few minutes. The sound suddenly stopped. I told myself that maybe I was imagining it. I turned off the light and went back to sleep. But that was just the beginning. 2 nights later, at exactly the same hour, I was awakened by a sound again. This time, the sound was not just scratching. It was like someone whispering in my ear, "Go, go, before it's too late." My eyes widened in terror, and my heart pounded. But when I turned on the light, no one was there, just absolute silence. But there was a feeling in the room, a feeling that someone was standing in the dark, watching me. Now I was sure that something strange was happening. The next day, I asked a few neighbors about the old man in the next unit, but the answers I heard only frightened me more. One of the neighbors, a middle-aged woman, said, "Old man? Which old man? That unit has been empty for years." I froze. I was sure the sound was coming from the same unit the previous night. That night I decided to stay awake. I turned off all the lights in the house and carefully listened to the wall next to me. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard the sound again. But this time, something was different. The sound was not coming from behind the wall. My breath caught in my chest. The thick walls of this building had something inside them. Something that shouldn't be there. I dared to touch the wall. It was cold, but it trembled slightly. It felt as if something was moving inside. It felt as if something was alive there. Suddenly, a scream echoed through the house. A scream came from inside the walls. A muffled scream, as if someone was buried there. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I opened the door and ran out of the apartment. I stayed at a friend's house until morning. And the next day, without any explanation, I packed up and left the house forever. A few weeks later, out of curiosity, I looked up the building's records. What I found explained all my terrifying nights. Years ago, a man who lived in the same apartment had murdered his wife and hidden her body in the wall. The police had never been able to find the body, but now I knew that she was still there. He was still stuck between the walls. Now, whenever I hear a sound in my house at night, I think to myself, maybe they are not just memories from the past. Maybe they are still stuck between the walls. That night, it was around 2 a.m. I was returning from a family party and decided to take a shortcut through the woods to get home early. The highway I chose was a long, lonely road that wound through dense trees. The moonlight shone on the road, casting the shadows of the trees like black ghosts on the ground. The car radio was snoring and the signal was weak in that area. Only the sound of the wind and the occasional cricket broke the heavy silence in the night. After driving a few kilometers on that lonely road, something suddenly caught my attention. On the side of the road, right in the light of the car's headlights, I saw a woman. She was wearing a long white dress and her hair was falling over her face. Her bare feet were on the cold asphalt of the road, standing motionless as if waiting for something. My breath caught in my chest. At that hour of the night, in the middle of the forest, the presence of a woman was not the only thing that seemed logical. I slowed down and passed her. I looked at her face for a moment, but I saw nothing. Her face seemed to be blurred, like a shadow. My heart was beating faster than ever. Was she an accident victim who needed help? Or was it a stupid joke from someone trying to scare drivers? But before I could think any more, I realized with horror that the woman was no longer on the side of the road. Although I had passed her moments before, there was no trace of her in the rearview mirror. It was as if she had never been there. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I took a deep breath and tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. But a few minutes later, I felt a strange sensation in the car. It was as if I was not alone. The air inside the car suddenly turned cold and a pungent, unpleasant smell, like sulfur, filled the air. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and kept my eyes on the road. But something inside me told me something was sitting in the back seat. I fixed my eyes on the center mirror, and there she was. The same woman in white, but this time inside the car. She was sitting next to me, her face expressionless, her black, empty eyes staring straight at me. All the blood in my body dried up. It was hard for me to breathe. My tongue was locked and I couldn't scream. The car suddenly started to shake. The steering wheel slipped from my hands, the headlights dimmed and I went out. It was as if something was surrounding the car. I heard the woman's breathing next to my ear, cold and quiet. Suddenly a piercing scream filled the car. I couldn't take it anymore. With the last bit of strength left in me, I pressed the accelerator pedal to the floor and started the car. The winding road was speeding past the car's wheels, but I didn't dare look in the mirror anymore. All I could think about was getting out of that damn place. After a few minutes that felt like a century, the car's headlights came back on, the engine slowed down, and the air returned to normal. The smell of sulfur was gone. When I came to, I had been dozens of kilometers away, but my hands still shook with fear. When I finally reached the city, I stopped in front of a gas station and took a breath. A gas station attendant, noticing my anxiety, came forward and asked if I was okay. I hesitantly told him my story. His face became serious. Then he sighed and said, "Did you see her too? The woman in white? You were lucky to be alive." When I asked him what he meant, he explained that the road had been the site of a terrible accident many years ago. The woman who was killed in that accident is the one that drivers see on nights. Some say that if you give her a ride, she will disappear in a few minutes. But if you just drive past her, she will find her way back to your car. She's still there. After that night, I never crossed that road again. But still, whenever I drive alone at night, I feel like she might still be out there, in the darkness of the road, waiting for another driver to cross that road in the middle of the night. And this time, maybe that driver won't be as lucky as I was.